Losing a child is the hardest thing a person can go through. For Michael Land, that pain is doubled. He's had to learn how to live after losing both of his children, his only 2 kids.
If I think about it, I self-pity myself because like my mother right now, she's dealing with Alzheimer's, and that's it. So it's just my mother and me. And I guess I get sad because I'm the last person. There is no more Land, in our family. I mean, nobody to carry the name on.
But Michael is finding a powerful way to carry on his son's memory by doing the things they dreamed of doing together and using those moments to raise awareness about how his son died.
He said, "Dad, we ought to go to some of these national parks sometime." That's when it hit me. And then I realized, how can I grab somebody's attention, pay attention to some old man that lost his kid? Let me go to the most beautiful places in the world, God's creation, and get out of, everything.
In this episode of Grieving Out Loud, Michael shares the heartbreak of losing his son, the lessons he wished he had known sooner, and how he's trying to help others avoid the same tragedy. Well, Mike, it is a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I am very sorry for the loss of your son, Preston, who was 25 years old when he died from fentanyl poisoning. I'm really happy to talk to a dad. I've been getting more and more dads on this podcast. It seems like for the first few years, it was all moms. We were the only ones talking, but now we're hearing from a lot more dads, which I think is great.
That is actually great to hear, because that's the first thing that when I started doing speaking engagements, it's like, where are all the dads? And I would ask the mothers, where's the dad? He won't talk about it. Men aren't supposed to share their feelings. And that's kind of how I got into it. And when I joined Texas Against Fentanyl, I'm still the only director that's a male. It's me and 5 women. And, but I'm starting to get more men.
You're still outnumbered by women. We have a support group at Emily's Hope, and we have a couple guys here and there come, but they're in the minority for sure. But thank you for doing that. Thank you for speaking out and being willing to share Preston's story.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate being here. So
you're doing some amazing things too. I want to get into that, but let's talk about Preston first. Can you tell me a little bit about your son?
Yeah, of course, he was 25 when he passed away. He was born in 1995, October 27th. And we moved to McKinney, which is outside of Dallas. I didn't want to raise him in the big city, so I moved out to the country.
Let's talk about that for just 1 second. I find it interesting. I have a point to make. I thought raising my daughter in a, medium-sized city in the Midwest would protect her, right? So you think, raising your son outside of the big city is going to protect them, right?
Right, exactly. And I did. That's why I didn't want him in the Dallas school district, because it was getting terrible back in the 90s. And I said, let's move out to McKinney. His mother was actually from the country, the small town out here. And we moved out here. There were 30,000 people. And now there's 200-something thousand. And there's a lot more money here now. A lot of rich kids and all that. So what do they have? More money to spend on drugs, which is sad. But no, Preston was a great kid. I mean, his mother and I divorced when he was 1. We got along perfect and everything, still friends today. But I was one of those dads that in the beginning, I was like a Disneyland dad. I'll give you everything you want, all of this stuff. We actually just became best friends. In fact, my parents always used to say, "Can we have him this week?" And I said, "No, it's my time." And so I would spend time with him, and we would do all the gaming stuff, whatever it was growing up. And a good student. He got bored with school. I think was a little smarter, not because he was my son, but he advanced a lot quicker than most kids. In fact, I got called into school one day, and they said that Preston won't read the books that we're supposed to read. And it was maybe the 4th grade or something like that. And they opened up the books, and I said, "Well, these are kind of stupid." And she said, "Well, now I know where he gets it from the father." He was reading like the Harry Potter books. It was kind of immature little books, but he never got in trouble at school or anything like that. And then, of course, high school came around, and he got his high school sweetheart. And they were in love. They were always at my house, swimming, doing whatever. And then downturn happened is when she went off to college, and they broke up, and he was just heartbroken.
And that's a story that, so many kids go through, so many people go through. Was it particularly devastating for Preston? Do you think that was some kind of turning point for him?
Yeah, 100%. And he even she went to Texas Tech, and he followed her out there the next semester, and she still just wanted to be friends. And he came back and just kind of went downhill. I'll admit he did smoke a little pot. I mean, he did those THC cartridges or whatever, but of course he was older. I couldn't tell him what to do. And I know that he had tried a lot of the drugs, but nothing ever took. He never got, addicted to cocaine or meth or pills or anything of that nature.
Like a lot of kids, he smoked marijuana or used it in various ways.
Right.
And we know that's not good for the developing brain. We know that can, set kids up for other issues. But also, he just experimented, it sounds like a lot of kids do. And a lot of parents see that as a rite of passage.
Exactly. That's exactly how I saw it. And he drank every once in a while, but he wasn't like a hardcore alcoholic or anything like that. But he was just like a normal 21-year-old.
A normal kid.
Yeah. But he was very isolated, still kind of in a depression mode.
Still, Michael had no reason to believe his son was in any real danger. That's why what happened on January 5th of 2021 came as a devastating shock.
I was in Phoenix at the time. I was living half-time there and half-time in Dallas area. And I was sitting there watching a show called The Pharmacist on Netflix. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh, I know Dan Schneider. He's been on this podcast, and he's a wonderful man. If you're not familiar with The Pharmacist, it's a powerful Netflix documentary that shows how Dan Schneider solved his son's murder in the case of a drug deal gone wrong. In the process, he became one of the earliest voices to sound the alarm on the opioid crisis, and he hasn't stopped fighting for change ever since. We sat down with him for a 2-part conversation on Grieving Out Loud.
This thing has been shown over 100 million times, 100 million views in 60 countries. And now we have a potential movie because of that.
As a journalist, I was in awe of the Netflix documentary, The Pharmacist. What was so fascinating to me was the way that the central character, pharmacist Dan Schneider, was a meticulous record keeper and great investigator. He was recording audio and video long before we had smartphones in our hands, and he was doing it to catch his son's killer in a drug deal gone bad, and later shut down pill mills in the opioid crisis.
I made a bargain with God. I said, look, God, if you will protect me, and if you help me get my son's killer off the street, I will go on a mission for you. For the rest of my life, I will try to prevent this happening to every other family.
If you'd like to listen to the full episodes with Schneider, we've posted links in our show notes of this podcast. While you're there, we'd appreciate it if you took a moment to rate and review this episode. Please share it with your friends and family. Together, we can raise awareness about the nation's fentanyl crisis and hopefully save lives. So you're watching The Pharmacist.
Yeah, I'm watching The Pharmacist, and it was that scene where he found out his son was murdered. And I looked at my best friend and I said, I couldn't imagine if I lost Preston. I've already lost one son. As soon as I said that, my phone rang. And it was Preston's mom. And she said, Preston's gone. And I said, well, gone where? She said, he's dead. The police came. They tried to get into his phone. It was blocked because they kept trying. He had just gone to Wonnenberg, which is a hamburger place here in Texas. And he literally went upstairs saying, I'm going to go up there and play some games. I have tomorrow off. And she found him the next morning sitting in a chair just like this, one arm slung over, and he never even finished his Whataburger. Of course, we got the autopsy back, and he had 12 milligrams of fentanyl, and that was the only thing in the system.
I want to sort of dissect this a little bit. First of all, Mike, you told me you're watching The Pharmacist. He's talking about his son who was murdered in a drug deal kind of gone bad. You're saying, oh my God, if I ever lost my son, that would be the worst thing that could happen to me. On the day my daughter died, I was working on a story on Good Samaritan laws and overdoses. I mean, what are the chances, right? Isn't that weird? And I still can't understand why to this day.
Right.
And then the other part, you talk about him being just in his chair, dead. I cannot tell you how many parents I've talked to, and I tell kids about this every time I speak to them, big groups of kids in schools.
Right.
How many parents have found thinking their kid is safe at home? You think your kid's safe, and they've gotten a pill probably through social media or via text or however, and they take it and they're dead in their rooms, and they find them in their beds or in their chair with their Game Boy or whatever, and it's unbelievable to me that this keeps happening.
And I make that point to a lot of parents when I'm speaking, and even other kids. I said, most people think that the people that are dying are the drug addicts that you see with a needle hanging out of their arm living on the streets. And I said, in my area in North Texas, because I'm the one that gets a call if somebody dies, and it's always just like you said, we found our child upstairs or down the hall in their bedroom. The biggest thing I see now, and I especially talk to the young girls about, is we're starting to see parents going in there and finding their daughter with a best friend. And the only mentality I can think is, hey, come over to my house Friday night and we'll try this together. And then they both die.
Yeah, I've heard of that as well. And it's awful, awful.
And most of the guys, especially with Texas Against Fentanyl, we all had boys that died around the same age. And they all died 2021 or early 2022. And I always say, what happened right before that? COVID. Everybody was isolated, depressed, sitting at home. And we talk about the mental health. Do I think that they had mental health issues? No. It's just like me. Everybody, when Preston died, they said, you need to get on antidepressants. And I said, no, I'm depressed because my son died. I'm not clinically diagnosed as being depressed. So
Right. There's a reason for it. Sure. And you know that Preston took a pill. How did you find that out?
They found another pill when they tested it. That one, I don't even remember what was in that one. His mom took care of that. But his autopsy showed, 12 milligrams of fentanyl. It was a blue M30.
What he probably thought was a Percocet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Have you lost a loved one to overdose or fentanyl poisoning? I'd like to invite you to share their story on our new Emily's Hope Memorial website called More Than Just a Number. They were our children, siblings, cousins, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, and friends. So much more than just a number. You can submit a memorial today on morethanjustanumber.org.
And so did you find out where he got it?
It's funny you say that. In the middle of doing the waterfall journey, I talked to his mother, and she said, we found the phone number. And I said, did you call it? And she said, yes, it's disconnected. And I said, well, there's no proof. But I said, I can find out who on that phone policy, and at least check them out and see if they're still dealing. But I said, I've watched so many families that have just gone through a trial and what it's done to them. And we're getting better. I said, do you want to spend the next 2 years with this court case?
So you and your ex-wife decided really not to pursue that, and law enforcement wasn't pursuing it anyway?
They didn't know. The way that they found out is with the iPhone. His sister, it was my ex-stepdaughter, her husband was able to get into his computer and found this phone number on the day that he died. And the other phone numbers that he used were calling his sister and his mom. So it was just a, deduction. And it was around the time that he had left to go somewhere.
But law enforcement didn't pursue the case. They didn't take his phone. They didn't charge anybody. Why is that?
Basically, because it's a real small town and there's only about 4 police officers in that town.
So not enough resources.
Not enough resources, yes.
And you didn't feel cheated? Because I've talked to a lot of parents who've had a lot of trouble getting justice in their cases, and they've had to do a lot of the investigative work themselves.
Yep.
I just spoke to a dad recently who went through several years, of investigative work and trying to get the attention of law enforcement and finally getting the DEA to do something. In your case, you didn't want to do that.
We didn't know because we couldn't get into his phone. So we just said it's and we just thought maybe he got it from a friend or something like that. And yes, I have the resources now. You probably know most of the people I know, Derek Maltz and, a bunch of people that I could get the phone number, find out who it is. And we're still discussing that, Preston's mom and I. And I just finished, we had our first murder charge yesterday in my county. And I was there with the DA and the family. And I think I cried more than the mother did.
Michael is referring to a new Texas law that now classifies the act of supplying fentanyl that results in death as murder. The legislature passed House Bill 6 in response to the alarming rise in fentanyl-related deaths across the state.
And that's actually due to Stephanie Rowe, who is Tucker's mother. And she started Texas Against Fentanyl. So there's the Tucker's Law, which is the educational piece. And then they also implemented the murder charge. So if you intentionally give somebody fentanyl in the state of Texas, it's a minimum sentence of 25 years. And our county just had that one yesterday. The girl was 21 years old. But now the boy was 17 years old. He lived right down the street from here. But the mother got 25 years. She pled out, and they charged her with murder and manufacturing delivery. So she got 25 years. In Texas, if it's an aggravated, she's going to have to at least spend 12 and a half years in prison. But the biggest thing is even the district attorney here has called me because they're struggling to get convictions. And one reason that is because of autopsies.
I don't think that these deaths are always accurately reported. And
Right.
sometimes we've talked about that on this podcast too, that the number is probably much higher than what we're seeing out there from drug-related and or fentanyl poisoning deaths. So certainly there are some issues in the system, right? And it varies from state to state and county to county. But
It is that way, yeah.
in this whole story that you mentioned, you also mentioned that you lost another son. So you've experienced loss twice.
Twice, right? It's that old saying, it's never going to happen to me. And then I thought, it happened to me twice. Both of my children are gone.
Michael lost his other son shortly after he was born due to a medical condition.
He had a brain issue during the birth, and we knew about it. And we knew that if he was to be born, I remember the doctor said it'll be like a Terry Schiavo. I don't know if you remember the Terry Schiavo, the girl that was in a vegetable state. And so we chose to give birth, and he didn't make it afterwards. So,
Right. So you lost a newborn infant and then lost Preston, and loss is loss. You know, I
Right.
mean, how has that impacted you in your life?
if I think about it, I self-pity myself because like my mother right now, she's dealing with Alzheimer's, and that's it. So it's just my mother and me. And I guess I get sad because that's it. I'm the last person. There is no more land, in our family. I mean, nobody to carry the name on. So I put it all into awareness and actually just trying to comfort other people. I've never, ever given advice on how to, of course, parent or deal with the grief. I always remember telling this, even to the brothers and sisters of the person that died yesterday for the charge. I said, the best thing I can say is I'm sorry. Because I remember at Preston's funeral, after the fifth person that came up said, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. I said, be glad you don't. And just leave it at that. And I think that's the best thing we can do. Because I don't know what it's like to lose a daughter. I don't even know what it's like to lose a son that's the same age for somebody else. We all grieve in different ways.
Right. Grief is different for everybody. But I think we as parents often share common threads. And one of those is going back and looking at what happened during our children's lives and a tendency to blame ourselves for what we did or didn't do.
Right.
And I think that I've heard you say when I was doing some research for this podcast that in some ways you blame yourself.
Oh, yeah. Basically, you're talking about being the friend instead of a father sometimes. I'll admit that. We became more best friends than anything else. And I never punished him when he did something wrong. There were times that maybe he was using something and I didn't notice it because we always want our kids to be happy. And if he's depressed for a couple of days and all of a sudden he's happy, I'm just happy that he's happy. Why isn't he happy? Now that I look back, did he take something?
Right.
And there's the guilt feeling all the time.
Well, and I think there's no room for guilt because I think that a couple of things, what you say about being a best friend or letting him go I did the opposite with my daughter. My daughter started rebelling in high school and I was basically played the bad cop. I did all these things that I thought were really hard to do at the time, punishments, taking things away, consequences, all of these things. And you did maybe the opposite. And both of our children ended up in the same place, not here with us, poisoned by fentanyl. So you can't say, if I would have done this, I would have had this outcome because you don't know. And I don't think it's true. And I think that there's no room for guilt. I took some grief educator training through David Kessler, and I'm now a certified grief educator. I know a lot about grief, spent a lot of time with people grieving as well. And I often say, even if I would have blank, fill in the blank,
Right.
this still could have happened. Even if I would have been a strict disciplinarian, even if I would have been more lenient, this still could have happened. And so the thing is that there's so much beyond our control as parents. There's social media. Like you said, the pandemic had just happened. We know that greatly affected kids. There's the drug supply that is tainted. Because back when we were young, the drug supply has always been out there. But back when we were young, it wasn't a death sentence if your kid experimented or even suffered from substance use disorder.
Right.
So the world has changed, the landscape has changed, and there's so much beyond our control. We control so little. And I think it's hard for men to give up control, right? I mean, our mind wants to tell us that somehow we could have made a difference or done something differently, but that's the mind wanting control.
And we fix things. That's what guys do. We fix things, and there should have been something I would have done. And I do share, even though there is that guilt, and especially at the national park, when I did the national park and I did the memorials, I would always do a verse, Bible verse that stood out to me. And then I would share, here's something I look back now that I wish I would have changed. I'm not telling you how to parent, but I look back and say, I wish I would have done this different. Not even for drugs or mental health, just anything in general. I wish I would have done different.
Well, hindsight is 20/20. And I think we all make mistakes as parents, and we all wish we would have done things differently.
Right.
Sometimes we did the best we could at the time with what I think all of our intentions as parents, and most people, I want to give them their intentions as parents, were always for the best of their children, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So you mentioned a couple of times this tour that you did. Let's talk about that. Tell me about, you did actually 2 tours. And this was in honor of Preston.
Yes, the first one was, I went to 25 national parks, and that's where the 25 Preston 7 came from. The number 7 is the completion in Bible. It's also, and I didn't figure this out till later, how many letters are in his name, his middle name, my first name, and his middle name, or my middle name, sure. But I wanted to ride my bike 7 miles in each park on the trails, and then go to the highest peak that I could and do a memorial. So I got the 7 miles in, whether it was hiking or biking. And then I would go to the tallest point at every national park that I could. The first one was Big Bend National Park here in Texas. We climbed for 11 hours to 7,000 or 8,000 feet. I did a memorial, put it out there, and shared it. And I did that for awareness and to honor my son. And the biggest thing that I remember receiving from people is asking, what are you filming? And I would tell them, and 99% of the people said the exact same thing. Thank God my kid's not a drug addict. And I would say, then you're who I want to talk to. For me to go out, even like lately when I've been on the streets of Phoenix or wherever, and I see people that are using, for me to tell them, do you know that this is dangerous and you could die? They know that. So I'm wanting to get to the first time users or the people that are experimenting. So,
right. There's so much judgment in that statement too.
Yeah.
And if people are suffering from substance use disorder, it didn't start that way. They didn't start with the intention,
right.
But a lot of times it is just kids like yours experimenting.
Yeah.
And people need to understand that. So this park tour sounds amazing. You went to how many national parks?
25 national parks.
How long did that take you?
I started on Preston's birthday in 2022, and I gave myself, I'm going to do it in a year. And I ended up doing it in 9 months, I think it was. And it's funny because I remember it was 25 Preston 7, and I ended on July 25th. Just no coincidence. I was in Horseshoe Bend in Arizona. I finished there. But I did most of California, of course, Yellowstone, Yosemite, all the Utah.
Michael's tour took him mostly through the western United States, where he posted on social media and spoke to people in person about the dangers of fentanyl. He says there was a reason the emotional and deeply meaningful journey ended at Horseshoe Bend.
Because he had just gone to Big Bend with a couple of friends right before he passed away. And he said, Dad, we ought to go to some of these national parks sometime. That's when it hit me. And then I realized, how can I grab somebody's attention, pay attention to some old man that lost his kid? Let me go to the most beautiful places in the world, God's creation, and get out of, everything. And it did. It picked up a lot of people that, I at least got to show them something beautiful and share the story.
And what did it do for you?
It gave me peace, a lot of peace. That was the biggest thing, a lot of peace and a lot of joy that people were paying attention. Because I always, and you've probably said it a million times, we don't want anybody to join our club. But it brought a lot of peace. And then, like I said before, when he first died, I was going to be the guy that fixed everything. I was going to be the guy that actually shut the border down myself. And,
I felt that way after Emily died in 2018. I thought if I just spoke out and talked, I could stop it. And then people kept dying. And I realized I couldn't stop it, but I could do my part.
Yeah.
You're doing your part.
Exactly. I mean, I called everybody, law enforcement. And then, of course, after the national park thing, the next thing you know, I'm getting calls from politicians. I'm getting calls from law enforcement. And now we partner up and do a lot of stuff together.
Because it got a lot of attention on social media, your tour?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. And then after the national park tour, then you did a second tour?
So I had planned on reversing it. I was going to ride my bike 25 miles on 7 continents. And I was actually going to end up in Jerusalem as the last continent for Asia. And then the war broke October 7th. So I put that off. And we did an event, Texas Against Fentanyl, in Mission, Texas on the border last October. And Derek Maltz was with Border 911. They were hosting it with us, and Tom Homie. I remember Derek saying something about, stop treating these people like numbers. You know, we always remember when COVID, we always had the number of deaths that were happening on your TV screen. And that hit me. I said, I say that in my speeches. I always talk about the numbers, but these children are not numbers. I said, they need to be honored in some way. So I left March 25th of this year, and I went to 25 waterfalls. I wanted to do 25 waterfalls in 7 states. And I basically would hold a picture of the loved one with a beautiful waterfall in the background, honor their child, and give them something, because we all have the posters or pictures of our kids that we can just look at on a wall. They've been on billboards, wherever. But I thought this might give them something to honor their children.
So the first tour of national parks was really about Preston, and the second tour of waterfalls was about other people's kids.
Anybody that would send in their photo, and they sent in the photo, and I remember I probably had about 100 in the beginning, and then Derek Maltz and Sarah Carter, they posted it. The next thing you know, I'm just getting pictures like crazy. And people ask me, because I just finished it, what was it like? And I said, it was almost as hard as losing Preston. And the reason I say that is I only mentioned their name in the photo, but everybody that would email me a photo, I got the story of their child. And I remember telling the guys that we do a father call, a monthly call. And I was telling them, I said, after about the second waterfall, before I was driving up to the waterfall or whatever, I'd put on comedy or something like that, because I would start getting teared up reading the names, because I knew all the stories. I just wanted to feel like a narrator reading off a name, because it took me a couple of takes on the first one just to read the names.
I get what you're saying, because I do this podcast every week, and I've talked to so many parents, and hearing about their children, it's heavy, right? And it takes its toll. It takes its toll on me. It really does. I don't record every single day. I have certain days I record because I know it's going to be a day where it takes me a while, you know. It's hard. It's hard to hear these stories, but they need to be told.
They do. It was the toughest thing I ever did, but it was the most honoring thing for me to be able to do that for them. I was honored to do that. And but the stories are there. The youngest I had was 8 months old, just right down the street in my city. They're still going through the trial right now, but the mother actually poisoned the baby, put fentanyl in the baby bottle, because she was an addict. She was an addict herself, and she didn't want to deal with the baby anymore. So,
oh my God.
As one of the nation's strongest financial organizations, First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card have the strength to do good. We support nearly 700 organizations and nonprofits. Our employees give more than 30,000 volunteer hours annually. And we are continually seeking ways to make South Dakota an even better place to live. It's the Premier way. First Premier Bank and Premier Bank Card.
And I'll mention these 3 big events that happened on the waterfall journey. I was outside of Seattle at a hotel, and I was having breakfast. Abilene Christian University golf team walks in, and one of the bags sits down, and it says Preston Cooper is the guy's name. And I was just like, oh man, another sign. And I asked the coach, I said, I got to tell you what happened and what I'm doing. My son's name was Preston. He goes, oh, we have 2 Prestons on our team. So I ended up doing a fentanyl awareness program to 6 college golf teams at the Hampton Inn. And as soon as I'm leaving, I put my Google map or whatever on to go to the next waterfall. It says exit 42 is your exit. Right as I pull up, the sign says Preston, Fall City. I mean, if you're talking about the signs, And I will say the very last one is in Santa Rosa, New Mexico. I was out in my truck getting something out of the car, and I had the car magnets of all the director's kids, 6 of us. And a guy walks by and he goes, "Preston Land, I know him. This is in Santa Rosa, New Mexico." I said, "How do you know him?" It turns out he knows the cousins on his mother's side. And he said, "What happened?" I said, "He died of fentanyl." And he goes, "Oh." He goes, "I was an opioid addict." And he goes, "That's the day I decided to quit, was when I started hearing about fentanyl." I said, "When did you sober up?" And he said, "January 5th of 2021. I said, "That's the day my son died." And I'm just like, I still even get goosebumps when I think about it. I mean, we're out there talking for 2 hours. Some of the signs of doing something.
Is making a difference. And I always say, even if just one life is saved, that's what matters, right?
That was the first interview I ever did. The guy asked, what would be a success story after the national parks? And I said, that one person says, "Hey, I heard about that kid, Preston, and I didn't take a pill."
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, I'll go do talks at wherever. And I was with Department of Public Safety, and they said, "God, this is not a big turnout." And I said, "Don't look at it that way." I said, "I've talked to the second largest high school in the United States, 7,000 kids. And all I care about is that one person listens that day. That's all that matters. Don't think about that you have to make 5,000 people understand. You focus on one person a day."
In addition to raising awareness about the dangers of fentanyl, Michael hopes to hold the pharmaceutical industry accountable for its role in fueling the opioid epidemic. He also urges people to think twice before taking any pill, because one wrong choice could be deadly.
When I speak nowadays to people, whether it's schools or anything, I say we live in a society right now where you can't turn on the TV without there being a drug commercial saying, "This pill will fix this." And I think that's the mentality most kids think is, "Oh, I'll just take a pill and it'll fix it," but bam.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Because kids are so comfortable with pills. We are a pill-popping society. And I think that's why we've seen kids get these pills, think they're real or whatever, and take them, no questions asked, because they do believe that all pills are safe. There's a pill for everything.
Right.
And so what's next for you? You've done this big national park tour. You've done the waterfall tour. You're involved in legislation in Texas. What do you plan to do next?
Well, that's a good question. I am probably going to put a book together because I've got a whole lot of history as well. And 2 weeks before I left for the waterfall, I was laid off from my company. Basically, now I'm free. I think I'm going to I talked to Stephanie. We have the Tucker Project, which is our curriculum that we've written for schools K through 12 and now higher education. She's going to handle that. And I think I'm going to handle more of the Texas Against Fentanyl.
We have curriculum at Emily's Hope, too. In fact, we've had it out for a few years, K through 12. Really great curriculum. It's in 5 states and growing.
Oh,
yeah.
good.
So if we can ever partner in that way at all.
Well, then, I need to get Stephanie hooked up with you. One of our main people she was the superintendent of Orlando School District, but I love doing the school talks. I talked, I don't know how many, I'd say 80 to 100,000 people maybe last year. In colleges, schools, law enforcement agencies. And my biggest thing is we need to bring awareness, because most of the kids will come up to me after reading or doing a speech and they'll say, "I get it now. It's a poison." It's not like, "Oh, I thought I had a choice if I'm at a party. Just give me the one without fentanyl." Like they don't understand it. And just the misconception of what's going on.
Right. Awareness is so important.
Awareness, yeah.
And education. I really believe prevention is the key. And we're working really hard in that aspect too. But thank you so much for sharing Preston's story with me today. I really appreciate it.
And as for payback for everybody that I share their story, I said the payback is if you can one time for the rest of your life just go share your loved one's story, that will save a life. And I always tell people that. And I talk to people, whether it's at a Taco Bell restaurant or whatever, I share the story.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, thank you for continuing to do this work in Preston's honor. And I just really appreciate everything that you're doing. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Well. Thank you so much.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Grieving Out Loud. Until then, wishing you faith, hope, and courage. This podcast is produced by Casey Wonnenberg King and Marley Miller. Are you ready to protect the next generation from the dangers of substance use? Emily's Hope has created a comprehensive K-12 substance use prevention curriculum designed to educate, empower, and equip students with the tools they need to make healthy choices. Our age-appropriate lessons start in kindergarten and build through high school, using science, real stories, and interactive learning to help kids understand their bodies, brains, and risk of drug use. We're already reaching thousands of students across multiple states, and we're just getting started. Visit emilyshopeedu.org to learn more and share our curriculum with your school administrators and counselors. At Emily's Hope, we believe prevention begins with education. Let's work together to keep our kids safe.